Taoiseach, the government is trying to manage many serious challenges on many fronts, some with little success and others with none. Housing remains a national crisis which is getting worse by the day rather than better. For the last 22 days, there has been a bus strike which has impeded on people across this country and has had a detrimental impact on both local and regional economies. A report yesterday confirmed businesses across Cork, for example, lost up to €20 million in this period. Provincial towns such as Athlone, Mullingar, Thurles, Sligo, others have all felt the pinch, with businesses down in the region of 20%. Retail Excellence Ireland predicted this morning that there would be job closures as a result of this strike. All of these losses, the strike itself, could have been avoided, Minister Taoiseach, if your government had acted when you became aware of the financial difficulties facing Bus Éireann over a year ago. Banks are pulling out of towns across the country. We have the threat of 250 post office closures, and the lack of delivery of broadband leaving 500,000 people waiting until 2023 sums up and justifies how rural Ireland feels neglected by your government. Worryingly, today we read in the Irish Independent, the chairman of Dairygold, who said the impact of Brexit, allowing customs and tariff controls in Ireland, will lead to the decimation in rural Ireland, with the cheese, beef, dairy, mushroom and drinks industry being seriously hit. If introduced, the WTO tariffs on cheese will be €1,671 per tonne, and the CEO said that this would be frightening and an appalling vista. Taoiseach, the negotiations on Article 50 start at the end of this month, and whatever emerges from the negotiations, Ireland will need a major programme to aid those who are worst hit. The agri-food sector is such a critical sector to our economy, and the agri-food sector is the sector that's going to be worst hit. The UK is already funding their businesses to protect supply chains. Ireland needs to do the same. So, Taoiseach, can I ask you to confirm that your government is requesting assistance from the EU, and do you have a plan for this sector, which employs tens of thousands of people right across the length and breadth of our country?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Well, let me put another perspective on what you've said here this morning, Deputy. First of all, Ireland's economy continues to grow strongly. Growth is broadly based, it's across the country, and employment continues to grow across all sectors. Earlier this week, the Government published our draft stability programme update, and the Minister is presenting that draft document to the Dáil Budget Oversight Committee today at 2 o'clock. Now, obviously everyone is aware of the uncertainties which you have commented on, and I'll say something further about those in a moment. But despite those external uncertainties, the growth forecast for 2017 has been upgraded to 4.3%, having grown at 5.2% last year. Now, these are not just statistics. These actually impact on people's lives. They impact on families' lives, because it means that people are now working. Our debt position continues to improve. Unemployment has continued to drop from a high of over 15%, Deputy, when this government took over, to 6.5% today. Now, that means something to individuals and to families. It has an impact on the quality of their lives. It means there's opportunities, and we continue to invest in the kind of services that people need as well, because we have a growing economy, all of which investment, when your party was in government, had stopped. Unemployment was growing, the economy was in free fall, we'd lost our sovereignty, and all of that has changed. So that's the broader context, despite the challenges that you point to in relation to Brexit and the changing economic situation. Now, you mention in particular the challenges in relation to Brexit, and we've already had a discussion here this morning about that. The government has a clear plan. You can see the draft paper that was published, that the headline priorities for the Irish government have been reflected in that. And of course there are certain sectors that will be particularly impacted, including, of course, the enormous challenges that the UK exit presents for the entire Irish agri-food sector. Now, the point is that the negotiations are yet to begin, but of course the government will take a most robust approach in terms of protecting vulnerable sectors. And that's clearly recognised in what has been published to date, that there is a special case in relation to Ireland. There is a special situation that has to be considered in the negotiations. Because, for example, in 2016, Irish agri-food exports to the UK came to 4.8 billion, or 39% of the total agri-food exports. So, of course, Minister Creed and all of his officials are working on these issues. They're looking at the potential impact of the UK vote. They're looking at the areas where there are greatest risks may arise, and the areas we will need to focus on once the negotiations begin. But of course the negotiations haven't begun yet, but clearly the preparatory work has been done, and the headline priorities for Ireland are about protecting our economy, including, of course, this very valuable sector.
Deputy Troy.
Thank you, Concora. Well, it's typical of government. You come in here and you try to take credit for every positive that has happened over the last number of years. You ignore the favourable international conditions that you benefit from. You ignore the sacrifices that are made by the men and women over the last number of years. You ignore the business people that are out there who are actually creating employment the length and breadth of this country, with little help from your government. You look at the whole issue of commercial rates, an issue that is facing businesses and has faced businesses over the last number of years, and we are still waiting on this government to take corrective action in relation to that. You chose to ignore the issues that I raised this morning about post offices, bank closures, the issue in relation to the strike. It's not funny, Taoiseach. It's not funny for the people in rural Ireland who rely on these services day in, day out. Can I ask Taoiseach quite specifically, in relation to a special fund, a stabilisation fund from the EU, will Ireland be able to benefit from that? Will the agri-food sector, a sector that supplies and generates tens of thousands of jobs in our country and who are going to be so detrimentally affected by Brexit, will we be able to apply for that in the not too distant future?
Taoiseach.
All of the points that I raised in relation to the increasing employment in this situation impacts on rural Ireland as well. The Labour Court is expected to make a recommendation today, and we absolutely want to see clearly our transport services back in place again as soon as possible. That has been the entire approach this government has adopted to this, that we want to see a resolution, and encouraging all parties to be part of that. The issue of post offices was discussed in detail here yesterday, and the government are taking a range of actions and initiatives, including in relation to banking in post office, that hopefully will ensure that post offices will remain across the country in rural areas. In relation to the point you made, of course, as the negotiations develop, it is absolutely essential that the vulnerability of particular sectors will form key part of those negotiations. Clearly, from an agri-food perspective, and given the importance of the UK market for the sector, our demand will be for continued free access to the UK market without tariffs and with minimal addition customs and administrative procedures, and to keep the UK market viable for Irish producers by minimising the risk from any UK trade agreements. That is clearly the approach that we will be taking, and in that context we will be discussing the very point that you raise, of course.